It's a Mailbag Friday on the podcast, covering a lot of your questions from Twitter. How do the Braves trade Marcell Ozuna? Should they be preparing Vaughn Grissom for left field? Should the Atlanta Braves be buying big on a shortstop and a left fielder this offseason? And what can we expect from Mike Soroka? Can he get back to the player that he was before? We're answering those questions and many more on this episode of Locked On Braves. So let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I am your host, Jake Mastriani. You can follow me on Twitter at shortstopball. Check out my bio there to see where I'm covering the game of baseball. Also, make sure you follow the podcast on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. Send in any questions, comments, or feedback you have for the podcast. This entire Mailbag episode Friday is going to be built based on your questions submitted on Twitter. So make sure you're involved there in the conversation. If you're new, make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. Also subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And thank you as always for making Locked On Braves your first listen of each and every day. Before we get into this mailbag episode, I want to remind you that it's brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. So this is a late night Friday edition of the Mailbag podcast. Got a lot of great questions that were submitted on Twitter. I'm sure we'll have some others here in the chat as well that we'll get to later in the podcast. But I appreciate everybody who submits questions throughout the week. Make sure, again, that you're following us on Twitter so that you can be part of the show and submit those questions in. Our first question of the night comes from Jay, who says, it seems like the Dodgers camp is hearing something different on the Braves front office pursuit of Trey Turner. David Vasai of LA radio host, sorry, I'm not really sure who that is, but says the Braves, Cubs, and Phillies have shown interest in Trey Turner. Now, look, again, I don't know this David person. I'm sure he's a very reputable source there on the West Coast. I'm just not familiar with him, but have the Braves checked in on Trey Turner? Sure. Have they checked in on Carlos Correa? I would imagine so. What is their level of interest in Trey Turner? I would imagine they're just exploring their options, as any good team and any GM should do. Do I believe the Braves are going to spend $28-30 million a year on Trey Turner for 6-7 years? I do not. It's just, I said this the other day, the sound that I'm hearing coming out of the Braves, coaching staff, front office, is that it's Dansby or it's Vaughn Grissom. It's not like it's Dansby, and if we don't get him, then we'll go get one of the more expensive guys in Trey Turner and Carlos Correa. And that's probably not how this thing's going to play out anyway. You're going to see Correa and Turner most likely sign first, and then you'll see Bogaerts and Dansby when teams, like the Cubs, who I'm sure are interested in all these free agent shortstops, and others like the Dodgers, who are, obviously in the market for a shortstop. Once they make, their moves for the top guys, then you'll probably see them pivot to maybe a Bogaerts or a Dansby Swanson. So it makes sense for Dansby himself to watch this process play out and see, where some of these top guys go, and then see if that opens up his market a little bit more. There's also this idea that the Braves grooming Vaughn Grissom for shortstop is just a ploy to kind of put pressure on Dansby Swanson and his camp. That was my first thought, honestly, when I heard it, but I also just think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if for some reason you don't sign Dansby and you're not comfortable going to the level that maybe another team is, and I think that's okay. And I want Dansby back more than anybody. But again, as I've been saying all offseason, $22 million a year for 5-6 years for Dansby Swanson makes me a little nervous. And again, I'm one of his biggest supporters and has been even before this breakout 2022 season. So if Alex Anthopoulos doesn't feel comfortable going to that level and Dansby wants to go elsewhere, then I think maybe you do pivot to Grissom and then make a big upgrade in left field. But as far as Trey Turner goes, it's just really, really hard for me to imagine the Braves saying, no, we won't spend the money on Dansby. Let's spend $5 million more a year on Trey Turner, a guy who is built around his speed and power combination as a smaller guy and somebody who's not very good defensively. We talk about signing Dansby, who what happens when his defense goes away? What happens when Trey Turner starts to lose some of that speed and power as he gets up in age as well? A guy who's already not very good defensively and may end up at second base towards the end of a 5-6 year deal. So again, there's risk obviously in all these deals, and they're both very good players. And I would take Trey or Dansby on the Braves. But again, I just don't see the Braves not signing Dansby, going for the money that it's worth to sign Dansby, and then saying, let's spend even more to go get Trey Turner. Are they interested? Have they checked in on Trey Turner? I'm sure they have. I just question their level of interest. Next question comes from Whit Price. He says, do you think the Braves would target Kodai Senga, and what is the max amount that you would pay for Bellinger? Full disclosure, I really haven't paid much attention to Kodai Senga just because I really don't think the Braves are involved. There's been no rumors that the Braves are involved. I do know MLB Trade Rumors projected him to get a 5-year, $75 million deal. That's about $15 million a year. That is $15 million a year. So it's not a terrible, killer contract. We just haven't seen Alex Anthopoulos give out long-term deals to free agent pitchers. We've seen him do the 1-year things, the Dallas Keuchels, the Charlie Morton, the Drew Smileys. We've seen him give out, some high AAV 1-year deals to veteran pitchers, but we've yet to see him go out in free agency and really sign a guy long term. So I just don't think he's going to pivot from that on a guy who, anytime somebody's coming over internationally, there's questions on how their game's going to translate. So I don't personally see the Braves getting involved in that. And I've been saying all offseason, I just think the bigger needs are at shortstop and left field. I don't see them spending money on starting pitching where they have a lot of really good depth there already. As far as Cody Bellinger goes, I'd give him a 1-year, $8 million prove it type deal. That'd probably be the max I'd be willing to spend on him. If you exhausted all your options for left field, nothing really seemed to work out, then I'd take a shot on Bellinger again at about that $8 million range. Maybe you give him a 1-year, $8 million year with an option for $10 million next year with maybe a $2 million buyout or something. So he gets $10 million guaranteed. I think he may get more than that. Let me know if you think that's too much. And again, I don't necessarily love the deal. I think there's better options out there, but that would be the most I would be willing to spend on Bellinger to see if he could come in and prove it on a 1-year deal. And David Searles says, do you think Mike Soroka can return to form? Do I think he can? Yes, absolutely. I think he can return to form. However, I'm not convinced that he will. And you've been listening to me on the podcast for a while now. I'm a see it and believe it kind of guy when it comes to things like this. Now, there are players that I will project, more so prospects, but Mike Soroka is just a unique case and a guy who had shoulder issues before tearing his Achilles twice. And it's something that's really, really difficult to come back from, not just one time, but when you've done it twice. And not to mention, and I talked about this the other day, an article from David O'Brien on The Athletic where they interviewed Mike Soroka, and he talked about the fact that he just completely had to essentially redo his pitching mechanics in order to try to avoid some of these injuries that his previous pitching mechanics were perhaps the result of. So this is a guy that's having to completely overhaul his pitching technique. That's going to take some time. And not to mention, he hasn't pitched in a big league game in over 2 years. Once, the season gets going. Again, can he get there? Yes, I have all the confidence in the world of Mike Soroka. I think he's a great guy. I think he's a great player with a great mentality. I think most players would have caved in after that second Achilles tear and what he's been through, but he's stayed focused. He wants to get back, and he wants to get back to that level that he was at. But that's just it's a big hill to climb. Now, I think I think at the very least he comes back and maybe he pitches to a mid rotation type starter. I certainly feel confident he can get to that level. But where he was before, I mean, we're talking about a Cy Young candidate, an ace, top of the rotation guy. So to say that he's going to get back to that level after all he's been through, it's just really, really hard to see that right now. But I would not bet against Mike Soroka. And I'm certainly cheering for him just as hard as anybody else is. I love the guy and I loved watching him pitch. And I certainly hope he gets back to that level. All right, got some more questions coming up talking about Marcell Ozuna and should the Braves spin big and fill the holes at shortstop and left field. We'll answer those questions next. BetOnline.net is your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game that you can find at BetOnline. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including NBA, MMA, boxing, and golf. Got the World Cup going on right now as well. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. I got a couple more questions to get into here. Keep submitting those in the chat. I'll get to those in the final section. The next one comes from William Fulgham, who says, what would you give in a trade for someone to take Ozuna and eat all of the contract? It would be a lot, but we are stacked at young pitchings. And there's another question from Sean Berry kind of on this note. I was going to answer both. He says, is Ian the best trade chip to pair with Ozuna to try and move him? So answer Williams' questions first. Nobody is taking all of Ozuna's contract. I don't care who you pair with him, unless you're pairing, Ronald Acuna Jr. or Michael Harris. Nobody's taking on all of Ozuna's contract. I've said all offseason, I think at best you can get somebody to take 10 to 12 million at best. And it's really hard to even see that happening. Nobody is taking on that entire contract unless you're taking a big contract back in return. And I don't like the bad contract for bad contract swap. I do think your best bet is attaching a couple of young pitching prospects. To Williams' point, we do have some depth there. And I think if you attach a young pitching prospect or two, then maybe you get a team to eat 10 or 12 million. But I think that's even if you attach, Jared Schuster and Kyle Muller, who are the Braves, top two prospects right now, according to MLB Pipeline, maybe you would get that type of return. Again, somebody who's trading for Ozuna, they're going to cut him. They're not going to want to deal with the PR headache. And you're most likely, if you're doing this type of deal, you're trading them to a team that's rebuilding. So they don't really want Ozuna on the team anyway. So again, you're essentially just paying for prospects. And I know that's something that Alex Anthopoulos certainly doesn't want to do, especially with how thin the farm system is for the Braves. But that's really your best bet in my mind in order to try to save money and get rid of Ozuna. I'm starting to lean towards the fact that Braves are probably just going to end up having to cut him. I hope that's not the case, but again, I think your best bet's to attach a couple of young prospects, maybe a Darius Vines and a Royber Salinas. So you get a couple, one guy who's just about ready and another one who's kind of coming up and a hot prospect with some more upside, again, and this is to save, I think at most, 10 to 12 million. I think more likely you'll see somebody who's willing to pay 6 or 8 million for a couple of prospects. I do think Ian Anderson would be a solid attachment on Ozuna. You trade him to a team that's maybe on the fringe of contending, and they see something in Ian Anderson that can unlock him to get him going. And I think even if you attach somebody like Ian Anderson, you're maybe getting 6 or 8 million back in that deal. Again, this is a tough situation. It's not just, you can't just trade Ozuna away and somebody take on that money. It's not going to happen, or it would have been done already. I'm getting a little concerned that Alex is going to take him onto the roster till next year because he just really doesn't want to eat that money. And I just don't think there's a deal out there unless you're going to put two of your best young pitching prospects and attach them to Ozuna. I just don't think there's a move out there where you're really going to save significant money by dealing him. So it's a really, really tough situation for Alex Anthopoulos, but he made the deal, he made the contract, so you have to live with that, and you obviously couldn't foresee the off-field circumstances that were going to happen, but that's what the Braves are stuck with. And look, I've also said this: Ozuna's a guy, you give him 450 plate appearances, he's going to hit 25 to 30 home runs. He hits the ball hard. It's just he doesn't do anything else for you. He can't play defense. He can't run. It's just, it's home run or bust for him. The Braves already have a lot of players like that in this lineup who can do other things as well. I don't want Ozuna on this team for many reasons, and I don't think it's needed on this team, but because of his contract, there's a chance he could still be on this team. Chris Shaffey asked, if the Braves went high on shortstop, like keep Dansby and then cut Ozuna, would you be okay with Grissom in left field as a platoon with Eddie? I do like the idea, and I've talked about the idea of grooming Vaughn Grissom for left field, whether they, sign Dansby or not. Obviously, they don't sign Dansby, then I think you're grooming him to be your everyday future shortstop. But I do like the idea of grooming Vaughn Grissom for left field, not to necessarily make it his permanent long-term position, but because I like him in that super utility Chris Taylor, Gavin Lux type role, who can bounce around the infield, go in the outfield, start 4 or 5 games a week, fill in if a guy gets hurt. I really love that role and that idea for Vaughn Grissom, but I would not put Vaughn Grissom in left field, and I don't think you can do this right away to start the season. I think you'd have to go down to the minors and get some more work there and then come up, but I would not put him in left field as a platoon partner with Eddie Rosario. If you're going to groom him to play the left field position, you put him in there every day, and that's his spot unless he doesn't earn it or he doesn't hit well. But I would not use him as a platoon, but I like the idea of grooming him for left field as an option there for sure, whether to make that his position in 2023 or whether to just increase his versatility to become that super utility type player for the Braves. Brad Horn says, if the Braves want to be a top 5 in payroll, why not re-sign Dansby and a top tier left fielder? If so, who's available that's a high market left fielder that they could sign or trade for? And that's exactly what I've been saying. And I think it's the decision that the Braves are trying to deal with and contemplate right now. Yeah, they're saying out loud they want to be a top 5 payroll. I don't know if they don't understand what that means or if they really mean it. Because again, it's one of those things, I need to see it to believe it, because if you're going to be a top 5 payroll, you have to go into the tax. It's something we've never seen the Braves do. David O'Brien, tweeted and said he's been told they're not going to be a luxury tax team, but you can't be a luxury tax team and be a top five payroll. You have to be a luxury tax team. And if they're going to go over the tax, which again, they're up against it right now with no other signings, they cannot sign Dansby Swanson right now without being in the luxury tax. And if you're going to go over the tax with just $233 million next year, you might as well go big and left field as well. Maybe not big, but make something, a marginal move, not do a platoon option out there. And I see JL commenting in the chat section, can we get Judge? You can't do Judge and Dansby. That probably would take you over the second luxury tax. So I think they're out on Judge. I think they're out on Nimmo, which would be another $100 million deal. But I do think that next tier down, whether it's Andrew Benintendi, who I like, Mitch Haniger, maybe Michael Conforto, somebody in that, range, that $12 to $15 million a year range. I do think if the Braves are going to go over the tax and they're going to sign Dansby Swanson, which, look, for all we know, the Braves have an offer on the table to Dansby Swanson, and that offer is going to take them into the tax. So I think if you read in between the lines a little bit there, unless AA just thinks he's going to make a miraculous trade to shed money with Marcell Ozuna, then if there is an offer out there to Dansby Swanson, then there's an offer to go in the luxury tax. And if you're going to go into the luxury tax, you might as well go big and left field. And again, my pick has been Andrew Benintendi. I think he's the best fit as a free agent. He gives you something different in the Braves lineup, somebody who's going to get on base, somebody who's not going to swing and miss a ton. I do like Andrew Benintendi. He would be my pick as a free agent. I don't really know as far as trades who all is available yet. I think we'll get a better idea of that at the winter meetings. I know there's been some talk about perhaps one of the guys from the Diamondbacks being available, whether that's Dalton Varsho, Jake McCarthy, Corbin Carroll. But it's just, I'm not really sure who's available out there in trades at the moment. Teoscar Hernandez would have been nice. He's already been dealt. Hunter Renfroe would have been nice. He's already been dealt. So I'm sure there's some guys available out there. We're just not, necessarily sure at this moment and what that price would be. Like I said, Braves prospect and farm system already deemed to be pretty thin. So could they be outbid by whoever is available out there? But I do think, back to Brad's point, you're going to spend big on Dansby. You're going to go into the tax. Might as well spend significant money and upgrade left field as well. That's what I think the Braves should do, but it's not my money. But hopefully that is certainly what we see this offseason. All right, take another break, come back, give you a couple news items, including Ron Acuna Jr.'s day in the Venezuelan League, and then get to some of your questions in the chat as well. So make sure you submit those in now, and we'll answer those here next. So again, hope you all had a great Thanksgiving holiday. Appreciate you joining me here tonight. Appreciate you giving us a listen. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and subscribe to Locked On Braves wherever you get your podcast. I appreciate all the support. A couple of news items real quick, and then got a couple more questions in the chat. Ron Acuna Jr. in his third game in the Venezuelan Winter League, expected to play 5 games there at DH. He went 1 for 3 with a walk and a couple of strikeouts. So again, the competition is what it is. I'm just, happy to see him down there and playing, getting to see some clips as well of him playing, still watching that home run that he hit the other night when he pinch hit. It's been, it's truly fun just to be able to see him do that in his home country. And it's great to see him having some success and getting some hits and getting on base. Certainly would rather see that and then the other way. And then Carlos Santana signed a 1-year, $6.7 million deal with the Pirates. Very interesting move there for the Pirates, but glad to see them spending a little bit of money. Look, I'm in favor of a spending floor in Major League Baseball. I think all these teams should have the ability to spend $100 million a year. So I'm happy to see, when small market teams spend money, even if it is on a Carlos Santana, a DH type player, veteran who, had some good moments last year for the Guardians for sure. So that was one signing that we saw on Friday. Again, I think we'll see the news really start to pick up later next week as we get into the winter meetings. All right, checking the chat real quick for a couple of more questions. Jacob Randy says, tell me what you think about the stake Braves go big at left field and get Andrew Benintendi or Brandon Nimmo or Cody Bellinger. And then I'm not sure. Talking about shortstop and then get big bullpen piece as well. So Jacob is going all in this offseason, wanting all the moves. If you don't get Dansby, let's say they don't get Dansby for shortstop, they don't get a shortstop period. You're going to go with Grissom. Then maybe you go big with Brandon Nimmo, which would certainly be a big, a different type bat in the Braves lineup, a bat that I think is needed, but, does worry me a little bit spending 100 million plus, which is what Brandon Nimmo is projected to get. I think if they didn't get Dansby, they rolled with Grissom. You go get Benintendi for left field. Maybe you get, an additional solid signing for the bullpen. I think that certainly could be an option and a way to go. I don't see Cody Bellinger coming in to be that savior. Like I said, if you're going to take him, to me, he's one of the last resorts. Nothing else worked out. Let's see if we can get this guy in a 1-year deal and see if he can bounce back. I'm not all that interested in Cody Bellinger myself. Hines says, I really like Brian Reynolds to play left field if we can move Marcell. I doubt the Braves would give up enough prospect capital to strike a deal with the Pirates for him. But what do you think? Yeah, I've thought about Brian Reynolds a couple of times now. I agree with you, Hines. I don't think the Braves would have the prospect capital to acquire a Brian Reynolds. The Pirates keep saying they're not going to trade him. They have no interest in moving him. I think if he did become available because of where the Braves farm system is right now, I don't know that they would be able to put together a package that would compete with some of the other offers out there. But I do like Brian Reynolds. I think he'd be a nice fit. I just, from what we hear, he's not available. And if he were, I think the Braves would most likely be outbid for his services. Hines also says, do you think if Atlanta doesn't get a premier shortstop, doesn't move Ozuna, or doesn't sign a left fielder who's at better than David, Peralta than the offseason, is somewhat of a letdown? I'll say this: if they don't make a big signing for shortstop or left field, this offseason would be a bit of a letdown for me. However, I've gone on record and said this team, as currently constructed, I think could contend for a postseason spot. Whether or not it's enough to win a World Series, I don't know. But this team, as constructed, with Max Fried, Spencer Strider, Kyle Wright, Charlie Morton, and then Soroka, Anderson, Elder, Muller, that starting rotation. And you're talking about Ron Acuna Jr., Austin Riley, Michael Harris, Matt Olson, Ozzie Albies, Travis d'Arnaud, William Contreras. That lineup, and then the bullpen, Raisel Iglesias, AJ Minter, Colin McHugh, Dylan Lee, others obviously in there as well. You're telling me that roster can't contend for at least getting to the postseason? So if no other moves are made, this is still a postseason contending team. Again, whether or not it's a championship contending team, we'll have to see how the season plays out. But that being said, if they don't get anything at shortstop and left field, it would feel like a bit of a letdown this offseason. Jomi says, been on the Benintendi train. He and Matt Carpenter solved most of our lineup and depth issues. Look, you get both of those guys. All right, let's say you don't get shortstop. Let's go back to the scenario. You aren't able to get Dansby. You're not willing to spend big on the other free agent shortstops. Nobody's out there really in trade. You go with Vaughn Grissom. If you just signed Benintendi for left field, you get Matt Carpenter for the bench. That, to me, would be a pretty solid offseason right there. I would love Benintendi in the lineup. I love what Matt Carpenter can give you, a left-handed bench bat who can play, a little bit all over, obviously getting up there in age, but I would be happy with that offseason, honestly. Obviously want much more, but I would not hate that. Marianne Smith says they need to keep Dansby and trade Vaughn because he is good, but like Dansby, and keep Eddie. I do agree they need to keep Dansby. I don't think they need to trade Vaughn Grissom. Look, if you're going to sign Dansby, then what's really the need to trade for somebody unless you're going to trade to upgrade left field? I would much rather them keep Vaughn Grissom, who you can stash in AAA if you need to. He obviously has minor league options. And again, I just love him for that potential super utility Chris Taylor type role, as somebody who can play the infield. Hopefully you groom him for the outfield a little bit. And he gives you that versatility. He can give guys off here or there if Braves infielders are willing to take days off during the regular season, or if somebody gets hurt like Ozzie Albies last year, you got a guy ready to step in who you feel comfortable can handle major league pitching and get hits. So I hope on everything they keep Vaughn Grissom, because I just like having his depth. If something were to happen, you can bring up Vaughn Grissom and feel comfortable, and you've already seen him at the big league level. Maverick says, even if we sign Dansby to the 6-year, $150 million deal, and then you try to pick up a left field player, I would look at getting someone for right field to platoon with Acuna, which Grossman wouldn't be so bad. Okay, I'm gonna ignore the platoon with Acuna part, but Dansby at 6 at 150. I just can't see the Braves doing that at $25 million a year. But I'm gonna ignore the platoon with Acuna part because that's just ridiculous in my mind, but respect your opinion there. But as far as Grossman, and somebody else mentioned this the other day in the comment section on YouTube, I do like Grossman as a bench bat, a switch hitter. I thought he did some good things for the Braves. If that was somebody they wanted to bring back on the bench, I wouldn't mind having Robbie Grossman back. DeAndre Williams says, do you see us re-signing Kenley Jansen, or what other bullpen arm do you see us adding this offseason? I've said that I don't think the Braves really spend much more on bullpen. I think Alex has done a great job with some smaller trade signings, Dennis Santana, Nick Anderson. I think there's one more arm that I can't remember right now that he went out and got that kind of has some upside as well. So I think he's done a good job kind of making these small moves on guys that are either trying to rebound or maybe they feel like there's something they can fix and break out. So I don't see them signing Kenley Jansen, but I'll go back to what we've kind of been talking about here today. If things just don't work out at shortstop, maybe you don't feel comfortable with any of the left fielders, then maybe you go out and just shore up the bullpen, kind of like last year. The Kenley Jansen signing last year came out of nowhere. You felt like the Braves bullpen was solid, it was set, and then bam, $16 million on Kenley Jansen to shore up something that we already felt like was pretty done at this point. So I wouldn't count it out, but I don't think it's necessarily a need. I would rather see them fill shortstop and or left field. William Fulgham says trade Grissom, Moeller, Schuster, and Ian Anderson to the Pirates for Reynolds and Bednar. May surprise you. I don't think that's enough for Ryan Reynolds. I really don't. I mean, Grissom, I think he'll hit at the major league level, but even with the Braves right now, where do you play him? Kyle Muller, I think, maybe has a ceiling as a number 3 pitcher. Schuster, the same, really. And Ian Anderson, has had some good moments. Obviously, had some great moments, but you don't know what he is right now. I don't think the Pirates are going to give up an all-star level player in Reynolds for that. Jay Flynn says, what about Malloy in left field? And I plan to do a deeper dive on Malloy and Cal Conley on Monday. We're going to start doing minors Mondays, where I'm going to do some scouting reports on a couple of Braves minor league prospects. So I'm going to talk about Malloy more on Monday. I've said this before, I do think he's an option for left field, not to start the year. I think he probably needs a little bit more grooming. Now he comes into spring training and they haven't made a move for left field, and they, maybe get a right-hander to platoon with Rosario, and that's their plan going in to the regular season. I still think it'd be a situation where it's similar to Michael Harris, where you start him out in the minors, you go with the plan you got in left field, even if that's a platoon. You see how that works out. If it's not working out and Justin Henry Malloy is going off at AAA, then yeah, I definitely see him, coming up. I don't think the Braves would hesitate if they feel like he's ready. We saw that last year with Michael Harris and Vaughn Grissom. So, but I don't think to start 2023, and I don't think you can go into 2023 with that banking on that being your plan. And just from what little I've seen from him in person, I don't think he's ready defensively for left field. I think he's got some more grooming to do there, but I do love his plate discipline and the bat. Obviously, a big year for him. So I do potentially see him as an option, and that may be why you see the Braves, maybe not sign a Benintendi, because they feel like Malloy could be that guy, in 2024 or later in 2023. So maybe they go with the platoon option for now, and then hope that Malloy continues to grow so that he could be that answer, later this year or later in 2023 or in 2024. Trent Dickerson says, yeah, I think Malloy needs at least 3 months in Gwinnett. I would agree. Like I said, I think it's a similar situation to what you do with Michael Harris last year. If you get into the season, you're really struggling out there, your plan's not working, Malloy's crushing it, then you bring him up, give him a chance and see what happens there. But again, I don't think you go into 2023 with that being your primary option or banking on that in left field. I just don't think he's ready for that kind of commitment in the Braves left field position at the moment. All right. Appreciate all the questions as always. Thank you for submitting those on Twitter and in the chat section as well. You got any more questions, make sure you leave them in the comments section down below on YouTube. But that will do it for this episode of Locked On Braves. As always, thanks for making Locked On Braves your first listen of the day. Now go make your second listen, Locked On MLB podcast, where MLB expert Paul Francis Sullivan brings humor, passion, and a unique perspective, talking about the biggest stories from around the league. Hopefully a lot of big stories to come with the winter meetings approaching. Again, thanks for listening. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at LockedOn_Braves. You can follow me at ShortstopBall. Also, make sure you rate, review, and subscribe to the Locked On Braves podcast wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.